Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is a deep dive into, well, a really unique stack of source material, stuff that tries to link the political history of modern Israel directly to ancient biblical prophecy. And we're really zooming in on this quite complex, decades-old idea about the identity, the significance of the 13th person to rule the modern state.
Yeah, it's the scope that's pretty unusual here. These sources, they're trying to draw a direct line,
Yeah.
a correlation between the first 13 kings of ancient Judah and Israel
Hmm?
and the first 13 prime ministers of modern Israel since, 1948. The sources actually call them the modern kings.
Modern kings.
And it's not just like a historical exercise. It's arguing that this 13th person, whoever ascends to that office, is going to fulfill a very specific end times prophetic role,
Okay.
maybe linked to the Antichrist, or more precisely, a kind of false Messiah figure, the one the prophecy says comes in his own name.
Wow, okay. That really sets the stage for the intensity here. So for this deep dive, if we want to get why number 13 is the prophetic bullseye, we need to start where the sources do, right? With the numerology and these time markers they use.
Absolutely. These claims really hinge on two big symbolic numbers, 13, obviously, and also 70.
Okay, let's tackle 13 first. The source material seems pretty clear. It links 13 directly to rebellion and lawlessness.
Explicitly, yes. And they pull examples, historical ones, to back this up.
Like Nimrod.
Like Nimrod, exactly, the mighty hunter. He's listed as the 13th descendant in Ham's line after the flood, and the source frames him as the sort of original rebel against God's authority, the first guy trying to build his own one-world government, defying the divine plan, a kind of first type of the coming Antichrist.
Right, setting a pattern. And they use contrast, too, don't they, with King Solomon?
That's key. They highlight Solomon. He spends 7 years, biblically perfect number 7, building God's temple, but then he spends longer, 13 years, building his own palace, his government buildings.
13 years versus 7.
Yeah, and that difference, the 13 years, is interpreted as humanity focusing on its own glory, its own systems, basically in rebellion against the spiritual priority.
So it creates this pattern, man's 13, always kind of against God's 7.
That's the idea presented.
Okay, now let's shift to the time marker, 70. The sources put huge weight on the 70-year mark for modern Israel, which was 2018. Why is that date seen as so critical, like an acceleration point?
Well, the question is, why 70? The source explains it as being made up of two perfect numbers, 7 for, well, perfection, and 10 for completeness or law. So 70 represents a kind of final determined period, and they tie it straight back to Daniel's prophecy, the 77s determined upon Jerusalem.
Huh, Daniel's 70 weeks, or 7.
Exactly. So applying that to the modern state, reaching 70 years is seen as signaling a prophetic readiness. Things are about to kick off.
And this is where the fig tree idea comes in.
All right, they bring in the fig tree parable. The fig tree usually represents Israel in these interpretations. So reaching 70 years means the nation, the tree, has matured. It's ready to pick up its destiny where it left off, maybe 2,000 years ago. It suggests a rapid acceleration of prophetic events starting around 2018, including the appearance of this crucial 13th figure.
Okay, so if the prophetic clock supposedly started ticking faster after 70 years, let's pivot from the prophecy to the politics. Looking at the actual lineup of modern kings, the prime ministers, that the source analyzes so carefully.
Yeah, the counting method itself is interesting. It's quite rigid in one way, but then seems flexible. They count only the individual people who first held the office, not the number of terms they served.
Okay.
And they specifically leave out interim PMs like Yigal Allon.
Right, but hold on. If you're being that specific, excluding someone like Alon to keep the count pure at 12 for a long time. But then the count suddenly became, as the source notes, kind of fluid, right? Bennett listed as 13th, then Lapid quickly as 14th. Doesn't that mess up the whole prophetic 13th idea?
That's a fair point, and the source does address it. They argue the focus isn't just the simple number in the sequence, but the template of the 13th. It's about the person who follows the longest, most significant tenure, which was Netanyahu's. They say even if coalition politics makes the number shift quickly, the prophetic role, the fulfillment, is tied to someone embodying that 13th pattern, regardless of how long they actually hold the job. The template is the target.
Okay, that helps frame it. Let's talk context then. The source points out the roots of the modern state. It's a parliamentary system. And the early leaders, like Ben-Gurion, the first PM, had strong ties to Marxist or socialist ideas, a secular foundation.
Yes, that's a crucial detail for the source material, because it sets up a contrast. Modern Israel's founding was largely secular, things like the kibbutz movement, very humanistic ideals. But the sources argue even this secular political line seems to be maybe unconsciously following these ancient prophetic patterns anyway.
And you see that right away with the parallels they draw. David Ben-Gurion. The name obviously echoes King David.
Yeah. Standard for kingship, yeah. And you had the first 5 PMs, all from the Labor Party, before that big shift to Likud with Begin.
And the Golden Mare parallel.
Yeah, the only woman, PM Golda Meir, mirroring Queen Athaliah, the only woman to rule ancient Judah. The source uses these kinds of parallels to suggest the modern political structure is sort of echoing the ancient monarchy, setting the stage.
But the real focus, the one who kind of breaks the mold in the source's view, is Benjamin Netanyahu. His time in office, over 18 years combined, making him the longest-serving PM by a long shot, way past Ben-Gurion.
Right, and what's fascinating is how the source weaves that longevity into their framework.
Yeah.
They point out that 18 years, well, numerically in some interpretations, that's seen as 6 plus 6 plus 6.
Oh, whoa, okay, that's a heavy claim. Numerically linking one of Israel's most dominant modern leaders to that number, the one associated with, the beast system.
Exactly. Now, the source is careful. It doesn't say Netanyahu is the false Messiah. Not at all. Rather, they argue his unusually long, record-breaking time in power is marked by this numerical signature. It sort of sets up his successor, the 13th person, as the immediate catalyst for the final act. The longevity itself is like a signpost.
Okay, so we've got the political parallels, the time markers, the numerology. But for this prophecy about the 13th ruler to really land, the source needs a historical template, right? A prototype. And according to this material, that prototype is King Solomon.
Solomon is absolutely the prophetic key here, mainly because he started out so righteous, so prosperous, but then had this tragic fall. The sources claim the false Messiah figure will present as a man of peace, directly mirroring Solomon's name, which means peace.
And their predicted successes run parallel too, worldly achievement.
Yes, exactly. Both figures, Solomon and this predicted 13th ruler, are expected to bring amazing prosperity, expand global trade, get respect from world leaders, known for wisdom, deal-making.
And this is where that number comes back again, 666. Linking Solomon directly to the mark of the beast idea.
It's right there in the text. The Bible explicitly states King Solomon received an annual income, a salary basically, of 666 talents of gold.
Wow, an economic foreshadowing tied right to his success.
The very symbol of his earthly glory, linked to the number associated with that future global economic control system in Revelation. It's a stark connection they draw.
But the false Messiah isn't just meant to reflect Solomon's glory, right? It's also his dark side, his fall.
That's the template for the deception. Solomon's decline is mirrored in how this 13th king is expected to operate.
So what was the core of Solomon's downfall that this figure is supposed to echo? It wasn't just the money, was it?
No, it was fundamentally spiritual betrayal. Solomon's heart turned away from worshiping YHVH properly. He used forced labor. He broke the specific rules for kings multiplying gold, horses, and crucially foreign wives.
The foreign wives?
Yes, the sources argue they led him astray into dabbling with secret mystery religions, maybe black magic, Kabbalism, using magical charms later in life.
So the source suggests, just like Solomon mixed worldly wisdom with spiritual darkness towards the end, this coming 13th king will operate politically, yes, but also with, supernatural power, the power of Lucifer, using lying signs and wonders to trick people.
Precisely. To deceive Israel and the world into thinking he's the real Messiah.
And all this ambition, political and spiritual, it all seems to focus on one specific place, a physical location needed for this prophecy, the Third Temple in Jerusalem.
Yes, the Third Temple is absolutely critical in this framework.
Why is the temple seen as so essential right now for Jewish identity, both nationally and spiritually, according to these sources?
Well, they point to a few key reasons. First, socially, culturally. The temple is seen as needed to unify this incredibly diverse Jewish population that's regathered from all over the world. It's a central physical focus point, especially given how many modern Israelis are secular.
Okay, unification. And the second big reason, something about atonement.
Yes, the theological reason. It's about the crisis of sin atonement. Since the Second Temple was destroyed back in 70 AD, modern Judaism, particularly Rabbinic Judaism, has relied on commentaries like the Talmud and on good works, prayer. But the sacrificial system described in the Torah is gone. The source sees this reliance on human effort instead of the divinely prescribed sacrifice as a spiritual problem that only rebuilding the temple and restarting sacrifices can fix.
Which leads us to the ultimate act, the climax, for this predicted 13th king, the abomination of desolation.
Right. The scenario laid out is the false Messiah figure gains massive credibility, worldwide support, by actually authorizing the rebuilding of the Third Temple. He allows the daily sacrifices to begin, all during a time of supposed global peace and security. This convinces many in Israel he is the Messiah.
But that's the setup for the twist, the turning point that reveals who he really is.
That's the abomination. Midway through his predicted rule, this 13th king figure halts the sacrifices. He then enters the Holy of Holies, the most sacred space, historically only for the high priest. Once a year, sits down on the mercy seat and declares himself to be God, demanding worship.
Unconditional worship, on pain of death.
Right. That's the description. Usurping not just political power, but the holiest religious role.
And just so we're clear for the listener, the source mentions something called the restrainer. Who or what do they interpret that as needing to be removed before this 13th figure can pull off this temple desecration?
Yeah, the source material generally interprets the restrainer from 2 Thessalonians as the influence of the Holy Spirit acting through the church, the bodied believers currently on earth. They argue this divine presence kind of holds back the full manifestation of lawlessness. So only after this restraining force is taken out of the way, often linked to the event called the rapture, can this 13th king be fully revealed and, well, sit in the temple claiming divinity.
It's really an intense narrative, weaving through politics, history, and some very specific theological interpretations. The source material draws this incredibly sharp contrast, doesn't it, between the true Messiah, who they'd say came humbly in his Father's name, and this predicted 13th ruler, who ultimately acts in his own name, driven purely by self-glory, self-power, a mirror of Solomon's fall.
And if we circle back one last time,
Yeah.
the whole prophecy is presented as this kind of mirror image,
Yeah.
reflecting both the potential glory and the potential failure of leadership. The source actually brings up the other 13th king, the 13th king of ancient southern Judah, Hezekiah.
Hezekiah, right. He was considered a good king, a righteous one, known for his faith.
Exactly. And when Hezekiah faced his biggest crisis, what did he do? He went into the temple, he laid out the threatening letters before God right there in that holy place and prayed for deliverance. So think about this. What does it suggest, maybe about human nature or identity, that the source predicts this false 13th king will take that exact same location, the holiest spot, where a righteous 13th king once prayed for help, and use it instead to declare himself divine?
That really makes you think, doesn't it? About peace, deception, authority, how power operates politically and spiritually. The core idea seems to be that whenever power turns inward, focuses only on self-glorification, whether it's ancient times or modern. That's seen as the ultimate form of rebellion.
Well, thank you for diving deep with us into this really complex and, I have to say, quite provocative stack of source material.